All right, so plants, much like humans, have hormones that can tell a plant when to shed its leaves or when a fruit will ripen and things like that. But also, they undergo transport. I'm going to just leave this up for a second. You can pause it and give yourself kind of a biological brain teaser here to see if you can solve this question, but I'm going to move on from it for now. Okay, so as an acorn grows into a tree, where does the majority of its biomass come from? Where does the mass of that acorn come from? The air, the soil, the water, or the sun? By biomass, I mean all the carbon that makes up its body. Well, the answer for that, anyone? Anyone? Is the air. The carbon dioxide from the air that's glued together to form carbohydrates by photosynthesis. A lot of people would say it's from the soil or something, but it's not. It's from the air. Now, if we look at a leaf, let's talk about gas exchange and transport. We already kind of introduced gas exchange, but it'll come up a little bit again. So on the surface of the leaves, on the epidermis, we have these donut-looking structures. This is a guard cell, this is a guard cell, and that's that pore. This is a stoma. These are stomata, and they can open and close, allowing for gases to get in and out. But they also, when they're open and they're in the sun, they cause water to evaporate. But actually, plants kind of want that to happen. Why? Well, let's start at the base of the plant. At the bottom of the plant are roots. Roots are organs that hold the plant in place and also absorb water and minerals. And they have increased surface area in the form of these single cell thick root hairs that project out from the root, allowing them to absorb lots of materials. They also have relationships with fungi, with this, those symbiotic relationships we've talked about earlier. Those mycorrhizal associations that increase their surface area, allowing them to absorb lots and lots of material. So here's an image of the mycorrhizae, just to remind you, they're also kind of fuzzy looking. Okay, now, meanwhile, there are tissues in the root that go all the way up to the leaves. And one of these tissues is called xylem. Xylem cells have thick walls, thick cell walls, and sometimes those walls are kind of in ring-like structures, kind of like the rings in your trachea that give them support. And here they're stained red. You can see those thickenings. And the cool thing about xylem cells is when they're functional in the plant, they're dead because they're hollow. They're like hollow drinking straws that run the length of the plant. So as they're growing, they're alive, but they're not doing their job until they're dead and they're hollow. Now, something I want to point out, remember water molecules? They look kind of like Mickey Mouse's head. They, I may not be able to, this thing may not let me draw here, so let me try. I'll try, there we go. All right, so the water molecules look kind of like this. We have hydrogens that are positive. We have an oxygen that has a negative partial charge. Water's polar, right? Water will stick to itself because of that, through hydrogen bonds, right? Water will also stick to the cell walls of xylem because it is also polar. So water molecules stick to another, that's called cohesion, and it will stick to the walls of xylem, which is called adhesion. Just like water sticks to a glass of water or a graduated cylinder when it makes the meniscus, it will stick to the walls of the xylem. This allows water to make a water column in the xylem because it's self-supporting. Water sticks to itself and it's holding on to the walls of the xylem, holding that water column up. Okay? So the function of xylem is to transport water, but it also is strong because of those thick cell walls, so it acts as structural support for a plant. In fact, wood is a whole bunch of xylem. Wood is xylem in a tree. And this is kind of covered up, but it has lignin in its cell walls, not just cellulose, but lignin as well a lot of times, which gives it extra strength. It's like adding rebar to concrete. Okay? Now, if you take some water and a clay cup and you stick a glass rod in with some mercury down here, all right? Oddly enough, as water evaporates out of this clay cup, it will pull this mercury upward. The same thing if you put a plant in the end of this device. It will pull that mercury upward, and they can measure how much pressure is being pulled by measuring how far the mercury moves. That's where you get that unit, millimeters of mercury, for pressure that we've used in lab before. Except we usually use digital probes, not actual mercury, right? So water will evaporate and be pulled up a tube, and it will actually have quite some force to it. Now, water will also be pushed by the roots, but not very much. So we can tell that at night, water will absorb into roots, especially at night typically. And as that water absorbs into the roots, it will push mercury, or water and mercury, up a tube a little bit as well. This is called root pressure. And this is how we used to think plants pushed water from one end to the other. But there's nowhere near enough pressure in this case to push water like from the roots to the top of a giant redwood tree or something. There's just not enough there. So what happens in roots is they tend to absorb a lot of ions, especially at night. I don't know why at night off the top of my head, but then water follows the ions because of diffusion, and that pushes the water upward. That's called root pressure. Now, just a fact for you here. Not enough pressure is generated in this case to move water all the way to the top of a tree, but it does push water all the way up to like a blade of grass or something. And sometimes in the morning you'll see drops of water on the blades of grass or blades of certain plants because they have a special structure called a hydrothode, which is basically like a stoma that's always open. It's a pressure release valve. So at night, if root pressure gets too great, that water has somewhere to go, and it'll end up making little droplets on the ends of those plants. And this process is called gutation. It's kind of a cool name. Gutation is when water squirts out at night out of these plants that have high root pressure. But these are normally just real small plants like grasses. Here's a picture of a plant. The hydrothodes are these openings here, and you can see the droplets in the morning after that water was pushed out during the night. That water is especially pushed out during the night because it's not being used for photosynthesis or anything during the day, and the stomata are all closed, so that pressure builds up in the leaf, and that's how it gets out, as these like emergency release valves. Okay, so water is coming into the roots, and it can form a column in the xylem. Also, there are those openings called stomata in the leaves, and water evaporates out of those leaves. So water comes into the roots, and at the top of the plant, water evaporates out of the leaves. Okay? Now, this is how plants move water from roots to leaves. Now, just a reminder, your stomata here are composed of two guard cells, which are cells that can fill full of water or lose water, so that means they can open and close. When they're full of water, they have a bunch of ions in them that causes water to diffuse in, causes them to swell up, they open up, and now gas exchange can take place. Okay? Now, how does this whole thing work? Well, stomata are open on the leaves. Meanwhile, water is diffusing into the roots, into the water column here. And there's a water column all the way up the xylem from the roots to the leaves. As one water molecule evaporates out of a leaf, it pulls at the water behind it because water sticks to itself through those hydrogen bonds that we learned about in Bio 1. As one molecule evaporates away, it pulls the next one up a little bit, and that pulls the next one behind it, and the one behind it, the one behind it, and that essentially pulls the entire water column up by one molecule or so. That's how water moves from the roots all the way up the xylem to the stomata. I suggest you Google this or check out YouTube. I'll try to put a video on Blackboard as well that shows how this works visually to help you see how that works. Alright, so in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about phloem. So I'll try to put a video on how Xylem works, and then we'll talk about phloem. Phloem is a tissue that supports sugars made by photosynthesis. But what I want to point out before I move on is how cool it is that simple evaporation out of the leaves pulls water up the plant. And so you can get water all the way to the top of a redwood tree without a heart, without a pump of any kind, just by using the physics of evaporating water. And this process is called transpiration.